When I watched Garrett slide the knife into that store-bought cake Jade had brought, I felt the first crack of something inside me, like glass catching the sun. My hands, still dusted with flour from the tiered cake I had spent all afternoon perfecting, trembled as I set down the spatula. The living room smelled faintly of vanilla and buttercream, but it couldn't mask the bitter tang rising in my chest. Guests laughed around me, oblivious, or maybe complicit, in the slow unraveling of the evening I had meticulously crafted. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that marriage was supposed to be simpler than this. That love was supposed to be a sanctuary. And here I was, standing in a home I had decorated with my own hands, hoping to give the man I loved a night that felt like magic, only to watch him ignore me like I didn't exist. Weeks earlier, I would have never imagined this. Our mornings were small, predictable rituals. Garrett would pour his coffee just the way he liked it, 2 sugars, a dash of cream, while I unpacked the groceries or fed the cat. I remember the way sunlight caught the curls at the nape of his neck as he read the newspaper at the kitchen island, his brow furrowed in concentration, completely absorbed. Those quiet moments, mundane as they were, felt like intimacy. We lived in a house that smelt faintly of cedar and my grandmother's lavender sachets, a house I inherited after she passed. I'm Amber Finch. The walls were lined with memories, my wedding photos, framed sketches from our travels, shelves of books I loved, and some I hated but kept because Garrett insisted. The living room sofa was the color of smoke, worn at the edges, and I loved how it held us both on lazy Sunday mornings. Where home felt like ours, or so I believed. Garrett worked long hours at his consulting firm, often disappearing into meetings and client calls. I, meanwhile, balanced my own career in finance and a podcast I had been dreaming about for years. Life was busy, but we managed. And we laughed, argued, and sometimes, late at night, we whispered confessions into each other's hair. It felt real, grounded, secure. So when his 32nd birthday approached, I wanted to mark it in a way that felt intimate but grand, the kind of night you remembered not for extravagance, but for... I baked 0.3 tiers, each flavored differently. Dark chocolate with raspberry, vanilla bean with passion fruit, and a caramel-infused sponge. I piped frosting by hand, weaving delicate flowers and leaves, testing color blends like a painter choosing shades. Every detail mattered, candles that flickered just right, the table set in gold, accented china, a playlist of songs that mattered to us. I wanted him to feel seen, loved, celebrated. I invited close friends and colleagues but kept the guest list intimate. I even thought about how to greet each person, the placement of plates, where the drinks would go. Everything had a purpose. I woke that morning with aching shoulders and a racing heart, buzzing with anticipation. By evening, the house shimmered, lights reflected off the polished oak floors. The scent of cake and roast chicken mingled in the air. The candles smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. I thought Garrett would notice, that he would walk in, take a slow look around, and smile at me the way he once did. When he arrived, I felt the familiar tug of love and relief. He stepped inside, briefly kissed my cheek, murmured, "Everything smells amazing." I smiled, feeling the warmth of validation. That was my opening, my chance. But the moment stretched too long without a follow-up. I watched him scan the room, but his eyes, his full attention settled instead on Jade. Jade Collier, in a dress too bright, a store-bought cake in hand, laughing like she belonged in our home more than I did. I remember forcing a smile, offering her a seat, trying to mask the sharp sting in my chest. Garrett's glance grazed me only once, detached, polite, and untied. Then he was leaning toward Jade, whispering something that made her laugh, brushing her arm casually. I felt invisible. Guests didn't seem to notice either. They were caught up in polite chatter, in the shimmer of the party lights, in the novelty of Jade's presence. I moved among them, smiling, serving drinks, cutting slices of the cake I had poured my heart into, and yet, each time I approached Garrett, he looked past me. Each laugh he shared with Jade felt like a little fracture in the world I thought I knew. By midnight, I was watching him leave. My cake, half eaten by polite strangers, sat on the table. Garrett's hand rested lightly on Jade's back as they slipped out the door together, leaving a quiet that swallowed the room. I didn't scream, didn't run after him. I didn't collapse. I simply stood there, the faint echo of laughter still clinging to the corners of the house, and breathed. In that silence, something solidified in me. Grief, yes, but not despair. A cold determination, precise and cutting. I would not be left in someone else's shadow. Not this time. Not ever. The next morning, the house smelled faintly of burnt sugar from candles and the remnants of cake. I walked through the living room, touching the polished oak, the velvet curtains, the china I had arranged with care, my grandmother's house, my sanctuary, my inheritance, and perhaps, I realized with a rising sense of clarity, my weapon. As I brewed my coffee, the questions began. Small, precise, dangerous questions. Where had Garrett been last week when he said he was working late? Why did our account statements seem off? I opened the bank app on my phone and froze. For 8 months, money had been siphoned from our joint accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger, each withdrawal paired with some professional excuse, some story that diminished me in the eyes of his colleagues. And Jade, she was the final stroke, a mirror reflecting the man I thought I knew. The realization came with a clarity that hurt but illuminated. Betrayal wasn't a moment. And traded. It was a series of choices, and I had all the proof I needed. I stared out the window, the early morning light spilling over the cedar trees, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I let the anger rise, sharp and precise, but then I let it settle into something colder, steadier. Revenge, I decided, would not be a spectacle. It would be a meticulous unfolding, as deliberate as the cake I had baked. Garrett would learn that the house was mine, that the money could not escape accountability, that his empire was fragile, and I held the blueprint of its collapse. And when the dust settled, I would be the one standing, not shattered, not overlooked, but resolute. Free. I poured another cup of coffee, inhaling the faint scent of lavender from my grandmother's sachets. And for the first time since that night, I smiled. Not at him, not at Jade, but at myself. The first clue didn't arrive like thunder. It came quietly, almost politely, the way uncomfortable truths often do. That morning after the party, I sat alone at the kitchen island with my laptop open and my coffee growing cold. Outside, the cedar trees swayed gently in the February wind, their shadows shifting across the kitchen floor. Everything in the house looked exactly the same. The gray sofa, the framed photographs, the gold-rimmed plate still drying in the rack. But something had shifted inside me. I stared at our bank account history again. At first glance, nothing seemed dramatic. A few transfers here and there. Payments labeled vaguely as business expenses, consulting reimbursements, travel fees. Garrett had always handled most of the business, related finances. That was our quiet arrangement. I trusted him with that side of things the way he trusted me with the house, the planning, the everyday rhythms of our life. But now that trust had a crack in it. And once you notice a crack, you can't unsee it. I scrolled further back. 8 months. That's when the pattern started. Small transfers at first, $500 here, $800 there. Nothing outrageous. Nothing that would set off alarms for someone who wasn't looking carefully. But I was looking carefully now. My heart slowed, strangely calm, the way it does when you finally understand that the storm you feared has already arrived. The transfers grew larger over time. 2,000, 4,000, 7,000. Each one labeled with neat little explanations: client entertainment, conference deposit, property consultation fee. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the refrigerator hum in the quiet house. Garrett had always been good with words, good at explanations, good at making things sound reasonable. But numbers don't care about explanations. Numbers tell the truth. I opened another tab and began tracing where the money had gone. That's when I noticed the receiving account. A secondary business account tied to Garrett's consulting firm, one I technically had access to, but rarely checked. I clicked. Another long list appeared. Transfers leaving that account too, except those weren't labeled, They were simply outgoing payments, and several of them had a name. Collier. My stomach tightened. I read the name again, Jade Collier, the same woman who had walked into my home the night before with a bright smile and a plastic bakery box like she belonged there. The same woman Garrett couldn't seem to stop looking at. I closed my eyes for a moment. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon dish soap. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the road, its engine fading into the distance. Life kept moving. Even while mine felt like it had quietly cracked open, I clicked deeper. Payment history, dates, descriptions. Some were marked consulting assistance. Others simply said gift. To one transfer, $5,000, had a note beside it. For the apartment. The word sat there. Garrett wasn't just having an affair, he was funding a second life. For a long moment I didn't move. Not because I was shocked anymore, but because the shape of the betrayal was becoming clearer. And clarity changes everything. Later that afternoon, Garrett finally came home. He walked in like nothing had happened. The same easy stride, the same casual shrug as he tossed his jacket over the chair. "Morning," he said, glancing at the clock. "Well, afternoon, I guess." I watched him from the kitchen. There was a faint scent of expensive cologne drifting in with him, something sharp and woody. "Morning," I replied. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and drank half of it in one long swallow. "You okay?" he asked casually. That question might have once meant concern. Now it sounded more like routine maintenance. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded. No questions about the party. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. Then he said something that made the air in the room turn cold. "Jade said she had fun last night." I folded the dish towel slowly. "Did she?" "Yeah," he said, leaning against the counter. "She thought the whole thing was cute. 8 hours of cooking. 3 days of preparation. My grandmother's dining set. The cake I had piped by hand until my fingers cramped. Cute." I studied his face. He looked relaxed, almost smug, like someone who believed he was untouchable. "Did you enjoy it?" I asked. He shrugged. "It was fine. Fine." That word landed like a door closing. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled slightly before turning away. I didn't have to see the name. I already knew. That night I didn't sleep much. Instead, I sat in the living room with my laptop and a legal pad, following every thread I could find. Money trails, property filings, emails. Garrett had been busy over the past year. Very busy. The biggest discovery came just after 2 in the morning. I found a contract draft for a property development deal Garrett had been negotiating for months. A commercial redevelopment project downtown, something he'd hinted about but never fully explained. The document listed investment partners, funding structures, projected profits, and right there, buried in the middle of the paperwork, Paige Donovan, 40% financial stakeholder. I blinked. I read it again. 40%, my inheritance, my grandmother's house had been used as collateral, not illegally, technically, but certainly without full transparency. Garrett's entire deal depended on my financial backing. Without it, I leaned back in the chair, the realization settling into place like the final piece of a puzzle. Garrett thought he was the one holding all the cards, but he had built his empire on foundations he didn't actually own. The house, mine. The inheritance, mine. The investment leverage, mine. And for the first time since the party, a strange calm spread through my chest. Not rage, not heartbreak. Strategy. If Garrett wanted to treat me like I didn't exist, then I would simply remove myself from the equation and watch what happened next. 3 days later, another piece of the truth arrived. Not from Garrett, but from someone who didn't realize they were helping me. I was at the office, finishing a quarterly report, when my coworker Elena leaned against my desk. "You know your husband was at the Meridian last week, right?" she said casually. I looked up. "The Meridian?" "Yeah," she said. "My cousin works there." She mentioned seeing Garrett with some woman. "Tall, blonde, expensive taste." "Jade," Elena continued, unaware of the storm gathering behind my calm expression. "They looked close," she added carefully. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. When she walked away, I opened my notebook and wrote one simple line. Step 1. Documentation. Because by then I understood something important. Garrett thought the party had humiliated me. He thought I would crumble quietly, disappear into the background of his new life. But what he didn't understand was this: the quietest person in the room is often the one paying the most attention. And I had been paying attention to everything, every dollar, every lie, every careless moment he thought I wasn't watching. By the end of that week, my notebook was full. Bank records, transfer receipts, screenshots, property documents, and something else, a plan. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. The kind of plan that unfolds slowly until the person standing in the middle of it suddenly realizes there's no way out. By the end of that week, the notebook beside my laptop had become something else entirely. Not just a record, a ledger, page after page of dates, transactions, notes, screenshots. I had color-coded sections the way I used to when preparing financial audits at work. Blue tabs for the joint account, yellow for Garrett's consulting firm, red for transfers connected to Jade. The system helped me breathe, because when pain turns into data, it becomes easier to face. I remember sitting at the dining table late Friday night, the house quiet except for the soft ticking of my grandmother's old wall clock. I had a cup of tea beside me that had long gone cold. The lamp above the table cast a soft pool of light across the paperwork spread out in front of me. Garrett still wasn't home. Garrett still wasn't home. That had become routine. Late client dinner, networking event, property meeting. His explanations arrived through short text messages now, like afterthoughts. But I didn't reply anymore. I simply filed the timestamps. Because patterns matter. And Garrett's pattern was becoming painfully clear. 6 months of regular hotel bookings near the Meridian. 4 months of apartment payments tied to Jade's name. 3 months of inflated expense reports submitted to his firm, and all of it flowing quietly through accounts that he believed I never checked. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my temples. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was fraud. The word sat heavily in my mind. Fraud against our marriage. Fraud against his business partners. And perhaps worst of all, fraud against himself, because Garrett had convinced himself he was smarter than everyone else in the room. And arrogance has a way of blinding people. The next piece of truth arrived on Sunday morning. Garrett had finally come home sometime around 2 a.m. and slept like nothing in the world was wrong. When he left again at 9, muttering something about a strategy meeting, I waited exactly 30 minutes before walking into his home office. Garrett's office had always been his territory. Dark walnut desk, black leather chair, floor, 2, ceiling shelves filled with business books he rarely read. The room smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. For years I had respected that space, the way you respect a closed door in someone else's house. But that morning I opened every drawer. The first few held nothing interesting, a stack of unopened mail. The second drawer, however, had a slim black folder tucked beneath some property brochures. Inside were printed documents, legal drafts, investment outlines, and a contract that made my pulse slow to a near stop, the redevelopment deal Garrett had been chasing. The one he mentioned casually over dinner months ago like it was just another project. Except this wasn't small. The numbers were enormous. Millions. Investors from 3 separate firms. City permits already in motion, and Garrett positioned at the center of it all like a conductor leading an orchestra. But the most important detail sat quietly. Primary financial leverage secured through residential property owned by Paige Donovan. My house. My grandmother's house. Garrett had used it as leverage to secure investor confidence. Without my stake in the deal, the financing structure unraveled. Without that leverage, the investors would walk. The entire project depended on something he didn't actually control. I closed the folder slowly. For a long moment, I just sat there. Not angry, not even surprised anymore. Just aware. Garrett had built a very tall tower, but the foundation belonged to me. That evening, I was in the kitchen stirring soup when he walked in. "You're cooking," he said, sounding almost amused. "Yes," he He loosened his tie and sat at the island. Smells good. The casual normalcy of the moment almost made me laugh. 8 days ago, he had walked out of his own birthday party with another woman. And here he was asking about soup. Long day, I asked. Always, he said with a tired smile. Then he said something that almost felt rehearsed. You've been quiet lately. I set the spoon down. Have I? Yeah, he shrugged. Just noticed. For a second, I studied his face. Garrett had always been handsome in a clean, confident way. The kind of man who filled a room easily. But now that I looked closer, I noticed things I had ignored before. The faint impatience in his eyes. The way he checked his phone every few minutes. The subtle distance in his posture. He wasn't just hiding something. He had already emotionally left. Garrett, I said gently. Yeah, are you happy? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. He leaned back in the chair. I mean, sure. Why wouldn't I be? I watched him carefully. Because people reveal the truth in what they don't say. You seem distracted lately, I said. Work's busy. And Jade. The name hung in the air between us. Garrett froze for a fraction of a second. Just long enough. Then he exhaled slowly. So that's what this is about. I'm just asking. He rubbed his jaw, clearly annoyed. Jade works with one of our partner firms, he said. We've been collaborating on some projects. That's it, a clean explanation. Neat, professional, and completely untrue. I nodded slowly. I see. You're overthinking things, Paige. Maybe I should have argued. Maybe I should have thrown the folder on the table and demanded answers. But something inside me had already moved past confrontation, because Garrett wasn't ready to tell the truth, and I wasn't ready to reveal how much I already knew. So instead, I simply served dinner. We ate quietly. Two people sitting across from each other in a house full of memories. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, the wind rustled through the cedar trees. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Garrett believed the story he was telling. He believed he had control over the money, over the narrative, over me. But control is a fragile illusion, especially when the person you're underestimating has already seen the entire map. Later that night, after Garrett went to bed, I returned to the dining table with my notebook. I wrote 3 simple words across a fresh page: the negotiation. Because that's what it would be. Not revenge, not chaos, just a conversation, one where Garrett would finally understand the truth. The house belonged to me. The money he stole had a paper trail, and the deal he was so proud of could vanish with a single signature. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. For the first time in days, I slept peacefully because I knew exactly what came next. And in 1 week, Garrett Slate was going to receive 3 very special gifts. Exactly 1 week after Garrett's birthday party, I sent a message. It wasn't long, just a few carefully chosen words. Garrett, we should talk. I think it's time we discussed a few things properly. Why don't you come by the house Saturday evening? Bring Jade if you'd like. It might make the conversation easier. I read the message twice before pressing send. Then I closed my phone and went back to watering the plants in the living room. The house felt different now. Not broken, just quieter. More honest. When you stop pretending everything is fine, the silence becomes easier to live with. Garrett didn't reply for nearly 3 hours. When he did, the message was brief. Fine. 7 p.m., no questions, no hesitation. Just the confidence of a man who believed he was walking into a conversation he could control. Saturday arrived gray and cool. By late afternoon, I had prepared the house the way I used to, before guests arrived. Fresh flowers on the dining table. The windows opened slightly to let the autumn air drift in. Soft instrumental music playing, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because this house had always been a place of order and dignity. I wasn't about to let betrayal change that. On the dining table, 3 folders sat neatly arranged, each labeled with a simple gold sticker. Gift 1, Gift 2, Gift 3. I ran my hand across the polished wood surface and exhaled slowly. This wasn't about anger. Anger burns quickly. This was about clarity, and clarity requires patience. At exactly 7:04 p.m., The doorbell rang. I walked to the door and opened it. Garrett stood there in a navy jacket, hands in his pockets, wearing the same confident half-smile he used in business meetings. Jade stood beside him. She looked just as striking as she had at the birthday party. Tall, elegant, dressed in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her eyes scanned the house behind me quickly. Curious, evaluating, like someone already imagining herself living there. "Well," Garrett said lightly, stepping inside. "This feels formal." I gestured toward the living room. "Please, sit." Jade removed her coat slowly and draped it over the chair. "Thanks for inviting me, Paige." Her tone was smooth, almost rehearsed. I returned the smile. "Of course." We sat at the dining table. Garrett leaned back comfortably. "So," he said, "what's this about?" I folded my hands on the table. "I thought we could talk about the future." Jade tilted her head slightly. "The future?" "Yes," Garrett sighed. "Paige, if this is about the party, it isn't." He stopped speaking. The calm in my voice seemed to catch him off guard. "I actually wanted to give you something," I continued. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "A gift, in a way." I slid the first folder across the table. "Gift 1. Garrett glanced at it, amused. "What is this?" "Open it." He flipped the folder open casually. The smile disappeared almost immediately. Inside was a legal document. An official eviction notice. Garrett's eyes moved across the page quickly, then again more slowly. "This isn't funny," he said. "I'm not joking." Jade leaned forward slightly. Garrett looked up at me, irritation flashing across his face. "You're evicting me." "Yes, that's ridiculous." I spoke gently. "The house belongs solely to me, Garrett. It was left to me by my grandmother before we were married. Legally, you're a resident, not an owner. That's just paperwork." "No," I said quietly. "It's property law." Jade shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Garrett scoffed. "You're seriously doing this right now? This is simply the first gift." His expression darkened. "Paige, stop being dramatic." I slid the second folder across the table. "Gift 2. "Go ahead," I said. He opened it more slowly this time. "Bank records, transfer receipts, screenshots, every payment to Jade, every withdrawal from our joint account, 8 months of financial history." Garrett's jaw tightened. Jade's face went pale. "What is all this?" she asked quietly. Garrett slammed the folder shut. "Private financial documents." "Not entirely private," I said. "The money came from our joint account, which means I have legal access to every transaction." Jade looked at Garrett now. "Garrett." He didn't answer. I continued calmly. "The total amount transferred." The number hung in the air. Garrett's voice dropped lower. "You've been spying on me." "No," I said softly. "I've been paying attention." Jade pushed her chair back slightly. "You told me the money was from your bonus." Garrett turned toward her sharply. "It is." I tilted my head. "Actually, it isn't." I tapped the folder lightly. "Which is why this document also includes a repayment agreement, full reimbursement of the funds within 90 days. Garrett stared at me. "You're threatening me." "No." I smiled faintly. "I'm protecting myself." For the first time since they arrived, the room felt heavy with silence. Then Garrett leaned forward slowly. "What's the third folder?" His voice had changed. The confidence was gone. Now there was something else beneath it. Unease. I placed my hand on the final folder. "Gift 3. "This one," I said quietly, "is the most important." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" I slid it across the table. He opened it, and the color drained from his face completely. Inside were documents withdrawing my financial stake from his redevelopment deal. My signature already notarized. Without my backing, the investors would lose their leverage. The funding structure would collapse. The project would die. Garrett looked up slowly. "You can't do this." "I already did. That deal is months in progress." "Yes. You'll destroy everything." I met his gaze calmly. "You should have thought about that before building it on something that wasn't yours." Jade looked between us, confusion turning into fear. "Garrett, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer. Because in that moment, The truth had finally arrived, not loudly, not violently, just clearly. Garrett Slate had spent 8 months building a second life, and in less than 10 minutes, it had all begun to collapse. For a long moment, no one spoke. Garrett was still staring down at the papers in the third folder like they might rearrange themselves if he blinked enough times. But numbers don't rearrange themselves. Napping a pin. And contracts don't undo signatures simply because someone wishes they would. You're bluffing, he finally said. His voice sounded thinner than before, almost hopeful. I folded my hands calmly on the table. The notarization stamp is on the last page, I said gently. You can check if you'd like. You can check if you'd like. He flipped through the documents quickly. His breathing changed, shorter now, more uneven. Jade leaned forward, trying to read over his shoulder. What does it say? She asked. Garrett didn't answer right away, because he knew. Without my financial stake, the redevelopment project lost its primary collateral. Investors would pull out within days. Banks would reassess the loan approvals. Permits tied to funding would freeze. A deal that had taken him a year to build would collapse like a row of dominoes. This is sabotage, he muttered. No, I said quietly. It's a boundary. Garrett's head snapped up. You're destroying my business. I tilted my head slightly. You already did that yourself, Garrett. The room felt colder somehow. Jade shifted in her chair again, the confidence she had walked in with slowly draining away. Garrett, she said carefully, what exactly is happening here? He ran a hand through his hair. She's overreacting. That's all. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I reached for a small envelope beside the folders and placed it on the table. There's actually one more thing, I said. Garrett's eyes narrowed. What now? Just some paperwork I sent earlier this afternoon. Sent where? To your company's HR department. Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that seems to press against your ears. Garrett stared at me. You didn't. I did. Inside the envelope were printed emails, photos from company events, screenshots of hotel reservations tied to business expense accounts. Evidence that Garrett had been conducting a personal relationship with someone connected to one of his firm's partner companies, while billing their meetings as professional expenses. Jade's face had gone completely pale. You told me those dinners were work meetings, she said quietly. Garrett rubbed his forehead. Paige is twisting things, and I slid one photo across the table. It showed Garrett and Jade at the Meridian restaurant, his arm around her waist, her hand on his shoulder. The timestamp was attached to an expense claim he had filed as client entertainment. Jade stared at it, then slowly looked back at Garrett. You charged our dates to the company. Garrett's jaw tightened. It's not like that. Then how is it? He didn't answer. Because the truth was sitting on the table in front of all of us, and truths have a way of spreading once they're exposed. I leaned back in my chair. Your accountant also received a copy of the expense records, I added calmly. Garrett looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. You went to my accountant. Technically, he's the firm's accountant, I said. Which makes those documents relevant. You're trying to ruin me. No, I replied softly. I'm simply stepping out of the lie. For a long moment, Garrett just stared at me. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The deal. The company, the money, Jade, everything shifting at once. Finally, Jade stood up. The chair legs scraped sharply against the floor. I think I should go, she said. Garrett looked up quickly. Jade, wait, she shook her head. You told me you were separated. His silence answered her. You said the money was yours, she continued. Another silence. Her voice cracked slightly. You said she didn't matter anymore. Then back at Jade. I can explain. Jade gave a small, sad laugh. Explain what? That you were stealing from your wife while planning a deal you couldn't actually afford. Garrett stood too now. Don't do this, but Jade was already reaching for her coat. For the first time since I had met her, she looked less like a rival and more like someone who had just realized she'd been cast in the wrong story. She turned toward me briefly. I didn't know, she said quietly. I believed her, and maybe she could see that in my expression. Take care of yourself, I told her. She nodded once. Then she walked out the front door without looking back. The house fell silent again. Garrett stood in the middle of the room like a man who had suddenly lost his map. You've destroyed everything, he said hoarsely. I stood slowly. No, I said. I've just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. He shook his head. You're going to regret this, maybe. I walked toward the door and opened it. The evening air drifted in, cool and quiet, but at least I'll regret it in a house that belongs to me. Garrett stared at me for a long time. Then he grabbed the folders, shoved them into his bag, and walked out without another word. His car engine started moments later. The headlights swept across the living room wall as he backed out of the driveway, and just like that, he was gone. The consequences arrived faster than I expected. On Monday morning, Garrett's redevelopment deal lost 2 investors. By Wednesday, the bank suspended financing review. By Friday, the project had officially collapsed. His company placed him under internal investigation over the expense reports. Jade disappeared completely. No more messages. No more carefully staged smiles. And Garrett. He moved into a short-term rental apartment across town. The eviction notice gave him 30 days, but I suspected he wouldn't last that long. Because once the illusion of success cracks, people tend to scatter quickly. That weekend, I stood alone in the backyard garden my grandmother once loved. The lavender bushes had begun to bloom again. Their soft scent drifted through the evening air. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Peace, not victory. Not revenge. Just quiet freedom. The house was still mine. But more importantly, my life was mine again, too. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no shouting matches in hallways. Just paperwork, signatures, and long meetings across polished conference tables where lawyers spoke in careful, measured language. Garrett looked different the first time I saw him during mediation. Not older, exactly, just smaller. Meetingsabse. The confident ease he used to carry like a second skin had worn thin. His suit still fit perfectly, his hair still neat, but the posture had changed. His shoulders were tighter now, his gaze restless, like someone who kept checking the exits in a room. We sat across from each other while our attorneys discussed terms, account reconciliations, repayment schedules. At one point, Garrett looked at me directly. "Did you really have to go that far?" he asked quietly. I knew what he meant. The deal, the company investigation, the eviction. I held his gaze calmly. "You went that far first." He didn't argue after that, because deep down Garrett had always understood numbers, and the numbers were no longer on his side. The settlement finalized 3 months later. The house remained entirely mine. Garrett was required to repay the $72,000 he had transferred from our joint accounts. The legal documents described it as misappropriation of shared funds, a polite phrase for a painful truth. His company investigation concluded shortly after. They didn't fire him outright, but the damage was done. The collapsed redevelopment project had already cost the firm investors and credibility. Garrett was quietly removed. In business terms, it was called a restructuring. In real life, it was something closer to exile. Meanwhile, life kept moving forward. Strangely, it moved faster once the weight of the marriage was gone. At work, I found myself more focused than I had been in years. Without the quiet emotional exhaustion of wondering what Garrett was hiding, my mind felt clear again. One afternoon, my director called me into her office. "Paige," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "I've been reviewing the financial audit you led last quarter." I waited. She smiled slightly. "It was exceptional. Thanks. There's a senior position opening in strategic finance next month. I think you'd be perfect for it." I blinked. The promotion came with a larger team, more responsibility, and a salary increase that would have once required Garrett's careful financial planning to manage. Now it was simply mine. I accepted. But the most unexpected change began one evening in my living room. The house felt different now. Lighter. Garrett's office had been cleared out and turned into a quiet workspace. The dark walnut desk was gone, replaced by a smaller table near the window where sunlight streamed in every morning. On that table sat a microphone, and for years I had talked about starting a podcast, something about financial independence, Something about the emotional side of money, how relationships, trust, and self-worth often shape our financial decisions more than spreadsheets ever could. But I had always postponed it, too busy, too uncertain, too worried about what. Now there was no one left to ask permission from. I named the podcast The Freedom Ledger. The first episode was simple, just me sitting in the quiet room, speaking honestly into the microphone. I didn't mention Garrett by name. I didn't tell the whole story. But I talked about something deeper. About how financial independence isn't just about money. It's about clarity, about knowing what belongs to you and refusing to hand that power over to someone who doesn't respect it. When I uploaded the episode, I expected maybe a handful of listeners, friends, coworkers. Maybe my cousin in Seattle who always supported my ideas. Instead, the numbers grew slowly. Then steadily, emails began arriving. Messages from people who had experienced something similar. Women who discovered hidden debts. Men who realized they had allowed someone else to control their finances. People who had stayed in unhappy. One message stayed with me more than the others. It came from a woman named Linda. She wrote, "Tay, listening to your podcast helped me open my own bank account today for the first time in 20 years. I didn't realize how much of myself I had given away." I read that message 3 times. Then I stepped outside onto the porch and sat quietly with a cup of tea. The cedar trees rustled softly in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And for the first time, I understood that what had happened to me wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. 6 months after the divorce, I saw Garrett one last time. It happened unexpectedly at a coffee shop downtown. I was waiting for a meeting when he walked in. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded politely. "Paige, Garrett." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. He looked tired, but calmer than the last time I'd seen him. "I heard about your podcast," he said. I smiled faintly. "It's going well. I'm glad." There was a pause. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "You were right." I waited. "I built everything on the wrong things," he admitted quietly. I studied him for a moment. Maybe he meant the business deal, maybe the money, maybe the affair, or maybe all of it. "Take care of yourself, Garrett," I said gently. "You too." And then we went our separate ways, not enemies, not friends. Just 2 people who had once shared a life and then learned how to live without it. That evening I walked through the house slowly. The lavender sachets my grandmother used to place in the drawers still filled the rooms with their soft scent. The dining table gleamed under the warm lights. The kitchen window was open, letting in the cool night air. Everything felt familiar again. But this time, the peace inside those walls belonged entirely to me. And that was worth more than any apology Garrett could ever offer. The best gift I ever gave Garrett was that birthday party. But the best gift I ever gave myself was refusing to stay wrapped inside someone else's lies. Down. Sometimes people ask me what the hardest part of that year was. They expect me to say the betrayal, or the night Garrett walked out of his own birthday party with another woman while I stood there pretending not to notice. But the truth is, the hardest part wasn't the humiliation. It was the moment I realized how long I had been shrinking myself just to keep the peace. How many little instincts I ignored. How many questions I swallowed. How many times I told myself, maybe I'm overthinking it. That's the thing about lies. They don't just live in the person telling them. They quietly settle into the person believing them too, until one day you wake up and realize you've been living inside someone else's version of your life. For me, that realization came with a 3-tier cake, a silent house, and a stack of bank statements. But it also came with something else. Freedom. Not the loud, dramatic kind, just the quiet kind that lets you sleep peacefully again. The kind that lets you build something new without asking permission. Every week now, when I record the Freedom Ledger, I think about the moment everything changed. Not the moment Garrett left, but the moment I decided I wasn't going to disappear. And maybe someone listening right now is standing at a moment like that too. So I want to ask you something. If you discovered the truth about someone you trusted, would you have the courage to choose yourself the way I finally did? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your dignity is worth protecting, consider supporting the channel and subscribing, because sometimes the most important stories we tell are the ones that remind us who we really are.